I'm Tom Schwab in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I help thought leaders get on targeted podcast interviews so they can grow their brand and grow their business talking to their ideal clients. Forget trying to break through the noise. Get in on the conversation they're already listening to.
Fab. Tom, we've known each other for a number of years. You know, you've been doing podcasting for longer than I have. What's a podcast now?
Well, I'm still amazed that we still call them podcasts, right? I asked my two youngest girls what the pod stands for in podcast. They rolled their eyes and had no idea, right? They've never known what an iPod was, It used to be that you'd have to plug in the cord and download this audio file, and you could only get a certain number on your iPod. Well, we still call it podcasting, but it has evolved so much, right? Here we are, 2024.
So there was no internet-y thing before podcast, before the iPod?
No. So there might have been streaming of different things.
Do you know what? It hadn't even occurred to me that it had been invented by Apple.
Wasn't necessarily invented by Apple, but where people listened to them was on their iPod. And so that's why it was called a podcast. Today, it's not even all audio, right? Today, 90% of podcasts include video. And it's really more of an on-demand conversation where you can listen to it when you want, where you want, at the speed you want. I'm always amazed when I hear people say they don't listen to podcasts, and then all of a sudden they'll be talking about, Joe Rogan or something they saw on BBC. And it's like, yeah, that's a podcast. But they didn't see it that way, right? Maybe they saw it cut up in clips on social media. Maybe they saw it on terrestrial radio or, Sirius XM. It's amazing. You can take that content. It's just that rich content, repurpose it and put it to so many different places.
Certainly, you could be watching it on YouTube on your TV. And originally it was a podcast. Yeah.
At the end of the day, I don't care what they call it, right? As long as people hear you and see you and you can get the word out there. That's the magic of it, that it's easy to create and then it's easy to repurpose and put it in the format that your ideal clients can consume.
Is Kalamazoo, Michigan, is that a buzzy place? How big is Kalamazoo, Michigan?
Kalamazoo, Michigan is about 100,000 people, right?
Okay.
It's in Southwest Michigan. It's halfway between Chicago and Detroit.
Okay.
And I have to say that 30 years ago, I took a job here on a snowy February day, and I said, I'll take the job, but I'm not dying here. I still don't want to die, but this is where I've grown up. And it's one of these things where I can tell people now, if I can do podcast interviews and grow my business from where I am, right? I live on 6.5 acres. There's vineyards behind me. It's remote, but if I can do it from here, you can do it from where you are.
How come you end up with a town or a city named Kalamazoo? Like, who comes up with that? Is it anglicized of some Native American word, or?
It's supposedly a Native American word that means land of bubbling water, but all the locals know that it really means land of rusty water.
You have some brown water, do you?
It's a great place to sell water softeners and filters.
Right. Okay. Very good. You work with people who are trying to reach a specific audience. Is that your interview, Valet, your day job?
Yeah. So we really, I think everybody wants to reach a specific audience, right? This idea of, I want to talk to everyone. Not everybody wants to hear you. Right. So you can't say enough of the right things to the wrong people. You always want to talk to a specific audience. So we're working with a lot of nonfiction authors. We're working with professional services, right? B2B, relationship sales, people that are doing category design work, really launching something new to the world. And they need a time to explain that to their ideal customers. And, so many people now are talking about, I'm going to break through the noise. I think that's ridiculous, right? Because everybody's yelling, nobody's getting heard. The people that are telling us to break through the noise are the ones that are selling us the megaphones. And I'd rather just, get in on a conversation. And today we do that on podcast interviews, right? Your audience is great. They're my ideal clients. They resonate with the problems and the solutions that I talk about. So, this is an audience to talk to. So that's what we do. We've been doing it since 2015. We've now got 24 people on our team. Not everybody wants to live in Kalamazoo. We're all geographically remote. And so we've got them in Europe and North America.
Were you a fully remote business pre-COVID?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. My last business that I built up and sold was brick and mortar. And I just thought, this is ridiculous, right? You can't service the world and say, I'm open 9 to 5 East Coast time unless it snows. And the other thing too is that you can find the best talent. And, people say, well, it's hard to manage the people. Well, I don't want people that I have to manage, right? If you need to be managed, you are not on this team, right? I want to lead people. And we've got a great team of self-starters. And I always joke that my microphone makes me sound good, but my team makes me look good.
Oh, very good. Very good. And so, yeah, you're right. Look, I think the audience for this show is your target audience. We've had Daniel Priestley on the show in the past, good friend of mine, who's written some great books. One is Key Person of Influence and another Oversubscribed. This idea that you need to have authority. And the reason I thought I'd get you on is because clients often say, love the podcast, Dom, thinking of starting a podcast. Can I pick your brains? Should we start our own business podcast? Should the company have its podcast? Or should we get the CEO to go on other people's podcasts? Like, if somebody asks you that, what do you say?
I always look at it and step back and say, what are your goals? Right? Because you think of Uber. Should I be an Uber passenger or an Uber driver? It's the same platform, but different goals, right?
Yeah.
So let's look at podcasts the same way. Should I be a guest or a host? Well, being a guest is a great way to go out there and get new exposure. It's a great way to get new leads, new backlinks, new social media followers, right? It's more of an acquisition channel. Now, being a host is a great way to nurture your current customers, to nurture your current leads, right? And the idea of, if I build it, they will come, that might have happened 15 years ago in podcasting, right? Where you could put up a podcast, you get new and noteworthy, and it takes off. Today, discoverability is a tough issue. The other thing, there's something in the industry called pod fade. 80% of podcasts die within the first 10 episodes. And, starting a podcast is easy. Keeping it going and keeping it relevant, that's tough. So I often will tell people, why don't you try guesting first, right? Make sure that you enjoy that. And it's, we had one client that gave the example. It said, how would I ever have planned my wedding if I had never seen a wedding, or if I'd never been in the bridal party? And it gave them an insight to it. And I think it's the same way with being a guest. You can see all these different hosts, how they do it, how you like it, and you can learn from them before you launch yours. It's a little ways of practicing before you do your own show.
Immediately I just thought, we used to have a team in Bulgaria, and I visited them in Bulgaria, and there was an apart hotel that we stayed in, that my wife and I stayed in. And it had been obviously built by somebody who'd never been to an apart hotel. Because really what it was it was a living room with kitchen cupboards. But there was no sink, and there was no fridge, and there was no dishwasher, and there was no cutlery or anything in the cupboards. And so it functionally completely pointless, but it sort of looked like a picture of an apart hotel that you would see if you'd never been in one. So it's just exactly like that. It's like, and they've got 300 rooms, and I just think, it's 300 rooms all full of kitchen cupboards, and they're completely pointless. It's just, so they made this hotel was just expensive and useless as an apart hotel. Just fabulous. And I've always, so it's that, yes, you could get a sense of it, but unless you've done it and lived it, then, you won't quite know, well, A, if you've enjoyed it, and B, what it needs to look like on the other side. Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah. And I've seen some people where the podcast turns into an embarrassment, right? This quarter, I'm talking to everybody and say, oh, I've got this great podcast coming out. I'm doing this. And then somebody asks you a quarter later, hey, how's your podcast? Oh, we don't do that anymore, right? So it's a brand thing, whereas being a guest is much easier, right? So I do a lot of interviews. I'm usually 1 or 2 a week. But in September, we're going to Europe. We're going to do the Camino de Santiago, right? So I'm going to be out for 5 weeks.
Where you starting from?
We're going to do the French route. So in the Pyrenees and go through there. But if I'm off podcast guesting for 5 weeks, no one will notice. If I had my own podcast and took 5 weeks off, it would really be hard to come back. And I know you can pre-record episodes and everything like that, but just realize when you start a podcast, that is a commitment.
Guest first, because it's a commitment. How many podcasts are there now, do you reckon, in the world?
I just looked this up for an article for Inc. that I was quoted in. There are over, depending which data source you look at, it's somewhere between 3 and 4 million. And that sounds like a huge amount, but there's a little asterisk afterwards. Less than 400,000 are currently active. So that means they published something in the last 45 days. So once again, it's one of those things where it's, especially during COVID, we all had nothing else to do. So a lot of people started podcasts and then killed them off once the world opened again.
Do you think there's validity in launch a book, do 10 episodes? Is that worth doing, even if you then haven't got a plan to do an 11th episode? Is there longevity to the content?
I think there's definitely a point to that. And I think your example that you gave is perfect, right? Where I'm launching a book, right? And I'm going to do 10 episodes. Maybe there's, 10 chapters in the book, and I'm going to do a podcast for each one. Dive deep in that. Maybe I'll have a guest on to talk about it. That makes a whole lot of sense. But at the very beginning of it, you start with, here's the goal of it. We finish the goal. The podcast ends. But I think a lot of people start the podcast and they'll either lock themselves in by the title of it or the description, and then the world evolves and their podcast can't evolve with that. So that's why I think you see a lot of people as they're doing their podcast, right? The name changes, right? It evolves, or they'll do seasons. I think that's a great way to do it where, this season we're talking about this, for the next 10 episodes, we're going to focus on marketing. Then after that, 10 episodes on HR, whatever it is. And that allows it to get some, new life, and it can be interesting for the hosts that way too.
That's the other way to get 5 weeks off, is because if you do a season, you can take 5 weeks off and then come back and do another 10 episodes.
But with that, you have to tell the audience beforehand. If you just don't show up a couple of weeks, they'll stop looking for you.
Yeah, totally. So if people are guesting, you have some insight into the types of people that get value from that. Can you measure it? Can you measure the impact of being a guest on people's shows?
If you're not measuring it, you're not doing marketing. Right?
Well, do you know what? You'll be doing what the marketing people called just awareness, right? Which is I'm spending here. Let me look at my KPIs. I have a budget. Oh, how are you meeting your KPIs? Well, I'm spending the money. I do meet some marketeers who still have that notion that it's difficult to measure, so let's just not.
Early on, somebody told me, if marketing doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. So if you're doing a activity and you can't measure it in some way, how do you know if it's working? So the first question you ask is who gets the most value from it? And I always look at this as we've got new clients coming in or prospects. First of all, is it a relationship sale, right? If it's just a little transaction, if you're selling a widget, if you're like everyone else, I don't have to know who you are, right? You don't need podcast interview marketing for that. Another thing is your geography. right? If all of your clients have to drive to work with you and you're only talking to a 10-mile radius, what's the point of going on a national or a global podcast? It might be an ego thing. It might be a proof source, but it's probably not going to drive clients. The other thing is the investment, right? Once again, it has to be a sizable investment, that lifetime value. I don't have to know who made my earbuds, right? I still use the wireless earbuds because they go through the wash once a week, but if I'm going to hire a coach, if I'm going to hire a consultant, somebody that's important to my business, I want to know what the heart is. I want to know how they see the world, because that's a relationship sale. Somebody pointed out to me that products are sold, but services are bought. And so from that, you need that conversation for people to get to know, like, and trust you. And then the question becomes, well, how do you measure it? Well, there's qualitative and quantitative. The qualitative is when you're on the interview, if the host is engaging, if they understand what you're talking about, you've got that good feeling of, man, that was a great conversation. I want to share that with everyone. Well, that's a good sense there, because often the audience is like the host or aspires to be like the host. And you'll get that, feedback when you record it. Now, usually it's a month or so afterwards, the interview goes live. Then you start to get the quantitative feedback. And what you should always do on a podcast interview is send people to one dedicated page. We call it a welcome page. It's not really a squeeze page or landing page, because you want to have the navigation there. If they hear you and they want to look around your site, don't slow them down. But this is evergreen traffic, so you want an evergreen place to send them, right? Right now it's 2024. There's probably somebody in 2027 listening to this. And if I promised them, oh yes, there's this resource here, the homepage is going to change. And if they go back to the homepage and don't see that, the traffic's going to bounce. The other thing is, when you send them to that page, you can attribute the traffic, right? So technically you make sure that page is not indexed by the search engines. So the only way that somebody hits that page is if they heard you on the podcast. And, I'll show you what a page looks like, right? I'll build one for this interview, just interviewvalet.com/MYFB, right? And first thing you're going to see is Dominic's picture. It's called the hero image. You know him, you don't know me. And it'll say, welcome, listeners, and pretty much boilerplate text, a picture of my ugly mug, right? And then my social media, right? Don't confuse people saying, you can go here to get me on Facebook and here on Twitter. And then you give them typically 3 offers, right? 3 ways to say yes. Give them a small yes, quick win to get them to your website. Give them a medium yes, something that's a little bit more time or money. And then the heck yes, right? The idea that if somebody hears you on a podcast and you were answered a prayer, don't slow them down in a funnel, right? There's a great book called Click Sand, How Digital Marketing is Ruining Your Business. And I love how Bill Troy wrote that. He was like the first one, the canary in the coal mine, that said, this is not working. And I love how he said in there that whales don't click and big fish don't swim through funnels, right? If you're selling B2B services, as they say, big ticket items, right? Do you really think that person is going to buy your Tripwire product and then be nurtured for 6 months before they give you 6 figures? No, it doesn't work that way.
Well, we were chatting earlier and you said you didn't find your wife through a funnel. People get seduced though. I must get 5 emails a day. Dom, as a business coach, we could get you 35, conversations a week or your money back. And it's like, who do they think I am? Like, how could I possibly have 35 conversations with people? I'm busy. I haven't got time to talk to almost a single new lead, let alone 35. And who could these people possibly be? It's just incomprehensible.
They're 35 people that would respond to a cold email and have nothing else to do that, oh, I'll talk to somebody, right? And I get those, we can get you more leads. Leads are the new Facebook likes, right? They're meaningless. And people are like, oh, you've got to have leads. Well, no. Start with the end in mind, right? What, as business owners, are we trying to get? What are we optimizing for? It's profits, right? And not to sound, capitalistic, but profits means you're adding value to the marketplace. And you're only going to get profits from people that value your service, that you're solving their problem. You're getting profits from ideal clients, right? So let's optimize for how do we get more ideal clients? How do we get more people that value our service, not just how can I get more leads? And, at that point, it's like, I love podcast interviews because after 30 or 45 minutes, you either turn me up or turn me off, right? If this doesn't resonate with you, that's fine. It doesn't mean you're bad or I'm bad, but I can guarantee you we won't work well together, right? So it's almost this little try before you buy. And it's interesting, the sales conversations that happen, that after somebody hears you on a podcast interview, the data says they close faster for a higher initial price with less churn. And really, it's more of a qualification call because they already know about you, right? They've listened to the podcast. They probably listened to a couple more, went to your website. The first time you're on a call, you're trying to learn about them to qualify them, not to sell them.
What should people be thinking about? Quality over quantity then?
I don't know that there's this dilemma where we say quantity or quality.
Yeah. Oh,
right? And
both.
The thing is if you think about where you get your profits, you've got to have quality, but you've also have to have some quantity, right? And so, Dom, you could fly place to place and talk to people one-on-one, right? And that if they're the right people, that would be incredibly effective, right? But it wouldn't be efficient. You can't scale that. You can't do that. So the idea is other people will say, well, just send 1 million emails. Well, we're getting more efficient at things that are less effective. So what podcast interviews does is it gives you the effectiveness, that quality of in-depth conversations, but then you get the quantity of tapping into large existing audiences. And you don't have to jump on a plane.
And then if you do get somebody who's interested, then you're jumping on a plane, you're jumping on one plane for one person. I was talking to a group of chief revenue officers on Wednesday night, and one of them said, he said, look, he said, in our sales process, we have a stage, which is develop the value with the client. So it's a workshop, it's a half a day. So the client, he said, look, if you demo software, it's free. I'm sitting at my desk. I'll take a meeting with you. You can demo my software. He said, that is not an intent to buy signal. That it could be, but it could be somebody who just wants to look at your software. He said, but if you say to the client, look, it's going to take half a day. We're going to get together. We're going to work out a value statement so that you can take it to your economic buyer internally. He said, my reps need to do one of those a quarter because our close rate on those is 80%. And so, but you have to sell that. There's a commitment from the client. So, if you get one person who's interested and you jump on a plane for one person, still much better to do that meeting face to face than on Zoom.
Yeah. And often we think that what happens in one industry, we can ramp up to other ones, right? That if I can sell a widget with Facebook ads in a funnel, that goes up to a big ticket sale. Well, if that was the truth, Airbus and Boeing would be selling planes off of Facebook, right? It doesn't necessarily scale. And especially if you're selling a product, right? If you're selling a product, I know what it is. I can test drive it. I can test drive the car. I can talk to other people that have that same service, right? That use that same platform. But when you start talking about services, you can't test drive consulting. You can't test drive coaching. And often the sale becomes the sample. So, how you interact with them in the sales process is how you're going to interact with them in the engagement. And so it takes time to figure out, is this sample what I want?
Yes. Years ago, our close rate was about 40%. And we said, look, we're selling a service. When we sell this, we're turning up at the client's office in suits with a PowerPoint deck. Like, so is everybody else. But we think we're much better than our competitors. And we think our people enjoy delivering their service much better than so we think we've got a better culture. We think we've got better people, and we do a better job, and we enjoy it. So we're not going to go to them. We're going to get them to come to us. And the close rate went up to 60% because people could, the people who weren't serious filtered themselves out and didn't waste our time by having a meeting with us. And then I'd been to see a company, and I'd been blown away by, they had this welcome tray, orange juice, cranberry juice, tea, coffee, still water, sparkling water. The water was their own branded water because they were, digging wells in Africa, and homemade muffins. And I went back to the team and I went, what can we do so that when people come in, they just go, wow, you've really, you've nailed the attention to detail. And I'm going to just assume your service is as good as that, because this is the only thing I've got in front of me. And Sam Staborski said, my mum can make a chocolate cake for everyone who comes. And it was a big square chocolate, like massive homemade chocolate cake. And we said to people, well, we told Sam's mum you were coming in to visit us, and so she's made you a cake. And the close rate went from 60 to 80 because everything was then lined up, and people went, God, if they can be bothered to do that, there's promises that they're telling me that they make about their services. And then I've repeated that at multiple companies since, and I've had clients take that inspiration and do similar things. In a service, it's that. Your sales process is, the theater of your sales process is the test drive of the service.
We had people ask us what our close rate is, and I'm like, well, do you mean how many people we say no to, or how many people say no to us? Because I read a book years ago called Hell Yes or No. Oh, now I can't think of the gentleman's name. Small book. And he said, life is easier when you have two answers, whether it's hell yes or no. So we have Darren Sivers, he's the founder of CD Baby. Yeah. And so that's what we do. When we do a discovery call, I want to find out about your business. You already know about ours. I want to find out your business, what you're trying to do, what your goals are, because I know your goal is not to do a podcast interview. It's what comes from that. And so we take it back to the leadership team and we say, okay, this is who they are. This is what their goals are. This is who they want to talk to. And with 9 years of experience, we can predict, are we going to get great results with this or not? And then we just take back to them. And if it's a heck yes, we know that we can deliver for you, then we'll go on with the conversation. But if not, we'll say, no, it won't work because of this, this, and this. And sometimes it's things that they need to work through before they get out on podcast interviews. Other times it's just, something structurally in their business, right? I can think of a gentleman in Kalamazoo. I would see him probably once a quarter. I want to do podcast interviews. It's like you install great audio and visual equipment in high-end homes, right? If your customers aren't within 10 or 20 miles, they're not customers. It would make no sense. You'd be wasting your time on that. And every time I would try to explain it to him, and he still wanted to do it. But it's like, no, if I can't look you in the eye and say, Dom, we will get you great results, it's a heck yes for me, then we're not even going to have that conversation.
Fab. We were chatting before we started recording about you're working on a new book. One conversation away. Well, I know what you're going to say, but tell the audience what your thesis of this new book you're writing is. I thought it was fascinating.
All right. So it's in response to this marketing message, and it's a good marketing message. It's not true, but they're out there and saying, you are just one funnel away, right? All you need to do is buy our software, come up with this perfect funnel, and riches will come out of the bottom. And, not only that, we'll show you people that have done this and, sold millions. They don't mention that, half of the millions was given back in chargebacks and the other half was in paid to Facebook, right? And I just look at that and say, we're humans. We know when we see in a funnel now, and people start running the other way. And I look at it and I say, there's a place for automation. There's a place for systemization, but you don't put people through those things, right? And I look at, say, everything that is great has come through my life, right? My best employees, my best customers, my best referral partners, my best suppliers. It's not because I built this beautiful funnel and then did all this Facebook ads and then got them through there. No, how I met my wife was that a friend of mine knew this girl. We were running together. Brian Jacobs did the introduction, and I'll forever be grateful, right? And people will say, well, that's not efficient. No, it's not efficient, but it's effective, right? And I think so many businesses now, they're like, well, this is how Elon Musk does it. This is how Google does it. Well, you're not Elon Musk and you're not Google, right? You don't need, 1 million new customers this quarter, right? You probably need 10, right? You may need 1. So why do you want to go and pester all of these people? Why don't you have a conversation with these people, the people that know the people, right? It's going to be a lot more effective in the long run.
I also think we had April Dunford on the show a couple of weeks ago, and her concept of positioning. And so people want to feel as though the market is as big as possible. And I think you want the market as small as possible, right? So, it's if I could get my close rate to be 100% and I only need 10 customers, well, I only need to have 10 conversations. And I think that's very efficient, right? And effective. If you're not positioned right, and the positioning's hard if you just try to shout at 1,000 people, you may as well have a megaphone on the street going, we do whatever your service is, hoping somebody walks past. Much better to say, there are probably, we need 10 new customers. I like it when you can get a sales and marketing plan that you can get your head round, and it's small numbers. And most of our clients are in this position where it's tens of net new clients that they need to double their business. At Pier 1, we had 13,400 customers. But when we did the maths, we could double the company on 100 new customers a year. If they were the right new customers. And then we said, well, what would they be buying from us? What are we the best in the world at? And then we had a plan that said, right, well, we need globally, we need 100 new companies a year that think that we're amazing at this. It's just so much easier to then go to market. And I think that when Simon Sinek says start with why, I think he should have started with who. I do say start with who, because Apple wouldn't have been successful if they didn't have an audience of people who wanted to queue to buy their product, right? That I was never in that. I'm not going to queue to buy a phone. So I'm still outside their target market. But unless there were people who wanted to do a thing, unless there's somebody who wants to buy your thing, you can't start with why, because there's nobody who gives a shit. You have to work out who your who is.
There's a great book called Super Consumers by Eddie Yoon. He wrote it with Harvard Business Review. And what he talks about is you just market to your super consumers. Now, he came from the CPG world, but I remember one of the examples that he used was American Girl dolls.
Yeah,
they figured it out that they would just market to their super consumers, the person that would buy every doll, every accessory, and they would tell their friends about it, and they'd put it up on social media, right? And it was a very small group of people, but that was their evangelists, and that grew the rest of the business. Now, they could have done it to everybody that had a daughter in the world, and they could have spent a whole lot of money, right? Sometimes I hear people like, it is $1 trillion market I'm going into. So all I need to get is 0.01%, and I'll be a multimillionaire. It's like, I don't know. Once again, more is not better. Better is better.
Yeah, very good. In a few words, what drives you every day?
Connections. I love talking with people, and that's where I get my energy.
Fab, what's your genius?
People call me an idiot savant. Some people don't know what a savant is. I'm very good at connecting dots, right? And that's one of the things I love talking to people, because I'll take a piece of information that Dom told me and something else and make that connection.
Fab. What unpopular opinion do you hold?
That it's not all about funnels and we don't need more leads.
What's the most significant risk you've taken?
Getting out of the service and then going to a straight commission job. So I was in the Navy. I graduated from the Naval Academy. When I left the service, my dad called me a fool because he's like, all you got to do is another 15 years and you get a pension. And I'm like, no, I can't last another 15 years. And then about 2 years later, I took a straight commission job and he called me a damn fool. He's like, you can't do this. And I'm like, I've got to, right? This is what I want to do. And so I think sometimes when you take those big risks, it's like, I got to make it work. And it happens.
Very good. How do you measure success in life?
Relationships. To me, relationships are the ultimate currency.
And if you think about your eulogy, how do you want to be remembered?
With great stories. The best funeral I ever went to was my grandfather's funeral. Everybody was mourning, but I was standing in the back with all of his buddies and they were telling me great stories. And that's what I want my funeral and eulogy to be, is people just coming up that had a relationship with me, that had a great story. And since I'm not there, they can embellish if they want.
What's the most recent thing you've learned or new skill you've acquired?
Okay, I'm going to say this, that your skills can fade with time, that sometimes there's seasons for different things. I used to skateboard when I was a younger kid, loved it. When my granddaughter wanted a skateboard for her birthday, I bought it for her. I was teaching her how to use it. We were outside playing for about an hour before I fell off of it and broke my wrist. And it was a humbling experience, but it reminded me that there's a season for everything. And so I need to come up with new skills as opposed to trying to do older ones.
Brilliant. Biggest source of inspiration?
My wife. She is the catalyst in my life. My life got a whole lot better once she came into it. It's like in chemistry, right? All the elements are there, but you need the catalyst to make the magic happen.
Fab. And what's the worst advice you've ever received in business?
Came from my grandfather. Choose carefully who you drink with because you can't choose who you work with. He was a mechanic in a small town, right? If you were within 10 miles of him, of Cunningham service station, you were his customer. And I just look at it now as we've got customers all around, right? We can be picky on who we choose with, right? If I don't want you around my family, if I wouldn't drink with you, I sure don't want you around my business.
Very good. Tom, how should people get in touch with you?
Well,
this landing page that you're going to create?
I mentioned it before, right? If you want to see what a welcome page looks like, go to interviewvalet.com/MYFB. And on there, I'll have an assessment, 10 questions. Will podcast interview marketing work for you? Mention my book. You can buy it on Amazon, but I'll be happy to send you a free copy there. And if you want to talk about how you could use podcast interview marketing, I'll put my calendar there. All of that will be back at interviewvalet.com/MYFB.
Fantastic. Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you today.
Dom, I appreciate you and all that you do.